Imagine walking into a bank, the polished floors gleaming, the soft hum of computers like a hidden heartbeat. To most, it is safety, stability, order. But what if behind those walls unseen forces were quietly deciding the fate of your money and of your life? What if the dollars you trust, the savings you've built, were not truly yours, but part of a system designed to move, manipulate, even vanish them without warning? Families like yours have been caught in this silent current, fortunes evaporating not by accident, but by rules few understand. Rules that banks never explain. Hidden fees, interest manipulations, complex lending structures. These are not mistakes. They are invisible mechanisms operating quietly, shaping destinies, and ordinary people believing in trust walk straight into them. A small notice, a delayed deposit, a frozen account, and suddenly the security you relied on is gone. This is the story of one family, whose lives will reveal how ordinary decisions, innocent trust, and unseen financial systems collide, sometimes catastrophically. They will navigate a world where every statement hides a secret, every policy can tip the balance, and the line between safety and vulnerability is razor thin. What you are about to see is more than a story about money. It is a map of power, secrecy, and survival. A journey into the invisible systems that touch every life. Watch closely, because once you see how deep it goes, you may never look at your bank the same way again. Stay with us as we uncover what banks don't want you to know, and why your family's future may depend on understanding it. The year was 1952, and Chicago breathed a restless optimism, the streets alive with rattling streetcars, neon signs flickering against rain-darkened brick, and the faint smell of coal smoke clinging to the air. On a modest corner of Madison and Lake, the Sullivan family lived in a 3-story brick building, unassuming, ordinary, but within its walls a quiet storm was gathering. Thomas Sullivan, a man shaped by hardship and hope, had arrived from Ireland decades earlier with nothing but a small leather suitcase and a fierce belief in progress. He carried the kind of determination that bends fate, the discipline to track every dollar, to measure every risk. Eleanor, his wife, was the silent anchor of the household, organizing groceries, bills, and the small daily rituals that held their lives together. Together, they raised Patrick and Mary, teaching them manners, curiosity, and the subtle art of noticing what others ignore. Every month, Thomas deposited his paycheck at the local bank, trusting it as one trusts a lighthouse in fog. He believed in the stability of ledgers, in the fairness of interest, in the safety of the system. But unseen currents were shifting. Inflation crept quietly, fees and policies were quietly being altered, and the very institution Thomas trusted was quietly evolving, not in his favor. Eleanor noticed tiny anomalies, letters with fine print changes, delays in processing checks, but Thomas dismissed them, confident in the integrity of the system. Yet the instinct of caution never left him. He began to study reports, read financial journals, trace patterns. Slowly, he realized that money was not static, that security was conditional, contingent on rules and decisions hidden far from ordinary eyes. Patrick, 12 and sharp-eyed, began asking questions that unsettled Eleanor. Why does a dollar today buy less than it did yesterday? He asked, clutching a handful of coins he had saved meticulously. The concept of inflation was abstract, but his intuition was keen. Mary, quieter, watched and memorized, internalizing the unspoken tension that flickered in her parents' expressions. The neighborhood itself was changing. Small shops shuttered as larger chains moved in, and whispers of neighbors' struggles reached Eleanor. Mrs. O'Malley's bakery was sinking under fees she didn't understand. Mister. And in that pause, the quiet truth settled like a shadow. The battle for their financial survival had begun. The figure outside the door waited for a moment longer, a silhouette blurred by the rain, before the knock came again, sharper this time, insistent. Thomas swallowed, his hand brushing against the leather of the letter, still clutched in his palm. Eleanor's grip tightened on the kitchen counter, knuckles white, while Patrick edged closer, curiosity fighting with unease. Mary stayed behind him, silent, eyes wide. Opening the door, Thomas faced a man in a dark coat, the brim of his hat dripping rain onto the threshold. His face was familiar, yet unfamiliar, lined with the subtle authority of someone who navigated corridors Thomas could only imagine. Mr. Sullivan, he said quietly, I need a word about your accounts. Inside, the visitor stepped in, leaving wet footprints across the polished wooden floor. Eleanor's gaze followed him, sharp, wary. Patrick and Mary remained in the hallway, peering around the corner, sensing that whatever conversation would follow was not meant for them, but that it would change everything. Inside the study, the man introduced himself as a representative from a regional banking office, a liaison between local branches and central authority. His tone was courteous, almost rehearsed, yet the edge of urgency beneath it was unmistakable. He spoke of systemic adjustments, new regulations, and retroactive policies designed to stabilize larger networks. But Thomas noticed the careful avoidance of specifics. Every answer led to more questions. Every assurance carried an undertone of risk. "It's not personal," the man said, almost as if anticipating Thomas's skepticism. "These changes affect thousands of accounts, but some accounts require monitoring, including yours. We're here to ensure you understand what's happening before problems arise." His gaze lingered on Thomas, sharp, calculating. Thomas realized the magnitude of what he was hearing. The changes were not arbitrary. They were part of a complex system that directed flows of wealth, often in ways invisible to depositors. Fees, freezes, interest adjustments, all tools of an architecture designed to maintain power. And ordinary people, trusting in the surface stability, were at its mercy. Eleanor listened, absorbing every word, while Patrick scribbled notes obsessively. Mary, sensing the tension, retreated to a corner, fingers entwined, silently cataloguing the unease. In the room, the rain drummed against the windows, a steady reminder of the world moving outside, indifferent to the quiet storm unfolding within. After the man left, the Sullivans sat in silence. The letter still lay on the desk, its significance now magnified. Thomas leaned back, rubbing his forehead. The reality was undeniable. The family's financial security was no longer a matter of diligence alone. It was now entangled with opaque systems beyond their control. Over the following weeks, subtle signs appeared that confirmed their worst fears. A check from a local client took longer to clear, interest rates shifted mid-cycle, and automated notifications hinted at new restrictions. Even small decisions, like which account to deposit savings into, carried unforeseen consequences. The Sullivans had entered a new world, one where knowledge, vigilance, and strategy were as critical as the money itself. Patrick began exploring the mechanisms of banking more deeply, sneaking into the library to read finance journals, memorizing terms like reserve requirements, liquidity ratios, and a regulatory compliance. His curiosity was now fused with urgency. He instinctively understood that ignorance could be costly. Eleanor, meanwhile, started compiling meticulous records of every transaction, noting discrepancies, tracking patterns, and cross-referencing letters and notices with dates. One evening, as Thomas worked over statements by lamplight, Eleanor asked, "Do you think it's deliberate?" Thomas paused. "Deliberate? Perhaps not in the way we imagine, but systemic, yes. The currents are engineered. Some forces benefit from knowledge, some from inertia, and the rest paid the price. Paying the rest for keys." The family's vigilance deepened. Conversations once mundane, about groceries, school, or neighborhood gossip, shifted subtly, layered with strategy and caution. Patrick noted the local shops reacting to shifting credit lines. Eleanor observed Mrs. O'Malley trying to recover from new fees, her frustration barely contained. Mary, ever quiet, began hiding small sums in unlikely places, an instinctive precaution that even she could not fully explain. Then, a phone call arrived, cutting through the evening calm. It was Thomas's former colleague from New York, voice tense, nearly whispering. "They're moving faster than expected. Some accounts are being targeted first. Be ready and watch your neighbors. Information travels slower than money, but it travels." The line went dead before Thomas could ask more. Warning was unmistakable. The invisible currents were accelerating. The systems they had only begun to understand were now acting, and the Sullivans were directly in their path. Questions gnawed at Thomas. Which policies applied retroactively? How would freezers be implemented? Could funds disappear overnight? And more importantly, what would happen if they failed to anticipate the next move? Winter approached, bringing with it bitter winds and longer nights. Chicago's streets, slick with ice and snow, mirrored the tension in the Sullivan household. Thomas and Eleanor reviewed strategies, adjusted allocations, and debated contingency plans. Patrick continued his study of banking mechanics, quietly absorbing lessons about risk, leverage, and the hidden architecture of power. Mary observed silently, sensing that the family's survival depended not just on money, but on awareness, adaptability, and subtle intuition. Yet the system was not passive. It responded. Small, almost imperceptible disruptions began appearing. Delayed deposits, misapplied fees, and subtle errors that seemed coincidental, but followed a pattern the family could now detect. Each incident reinforced the lesson that what looks ordinary can conceal extraordinary consequences. One snowy morning, Thomas noticed something on his statement, an unusual transaction, small in amount but strange in timing. Eleanor spotted a discrepancy in interest calculations. Patrick, reading over his father's shoulder, pointed to a pattern he had begun to map. Accounts were being prioritized, some intentionally delayed. And Mary, she held a coin in her hand, eyes wide, as if sensing the hidden forces at play. The realization hit them like the icy wind outside. The quiet, invisible system that had governed their lives, the bank they had trusted, the security they had relied upon, it was not neutral. It was alive, adaptive, and indifferent to their innocence. And they were now participants in a game whose rules were never explained, whose moves were rarely predictable, and whose stakes were survival itself. Then, as if confirming their fears, a second letter arrived. This one stamped urgent, marked in bold with bureaucratic precision. Certain funds had been restricted. Some transactions required new approvals. The Sullivans read it together, Eleanor clutching her husband's arm. The letter did not threaten directly, yet its implications were unmistakable. They were now entangled in forces far larger than themselves. Outside, the city pressed on, unaware. The rain had frozen into a sharp, bitter wind. Streetcars slid along tracks, neon signs reflected in icy puddles, and neighbors went about their routines, blind to the invisible battle shaping destinies. Inside, the Sullivan family sat together, a tense, unified force. Thomas stared at the letter, Eleanor by his side, Patrick absorbing every word, Mary quietly observing. And in that moment, Thomas knew the battle had only begun, and that what happened next could define not just their finances, but the very structure of their family's future. A shadow passed across the frosted window pane, a figure from the bank perhaps, or someone sent to monitor the unfolding events. Thomas stiffened. Eleanor held her breath. Patrick and Mary exchanged a glance, a silent recognition that the world had shifted in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. And as the wind howled outside, Thomas realized something chilling. The Sullivans were no longer merely account holders. They were participants in a system that could decide the fate of every dollar, every decision, every hope they had quietly nurtured. The shadow outside the window moved closer, deliberate, knowing, signaling that the next confrontation, the first test of their survival, was about to arrive. The shadow outside the window lingered, shifting against the frozen glass as if weighing every movement inside the Sullivan home. Thomas stepped closer, heart steadying but mind racing. Eleanor pressed her hand against his arm, a silent warning. Patrick and Mary, sensing the gravity, stayed close together, their small bodies taut with anticipation. The figure knocked again, sharp, deliberate, a signal that hesitation was no longer an option. Thomas opened the door cautiously. The man who stepped inside carried a leather briefcase worn at the edges and an air of authority that spoke of countless offices, countless ledgers, countless decisions made behind closed doors. He introduced himself only as Mr. Caldwell, Regional Compliance Officer, and immediately the room felt smaller, weighed down by the implications of his presence. "I understand your concerns," Caldwell said evenly, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of someone trained to read both people and numbers. "But what you're seeing, these freezes, these adjustments, is part of a larger system. Some accounts are prioritized for liquidity management, some for regulatory compliance, and some are monitored for anomalies." Thomas's stomach tightened. "Anomalies?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," Caldwell said. "Occasionally accounts reflect patterns that deviate from expected behavior. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers, even the pace of savings can trigger attention. Not necessarily a warning of wrongdoing, but of irregularity that requires oversight." His gaze lingered on Thomas, sharp and unreadable. Some families notice these changes, some don't. Some are caught off guard. The words felt heavy, deliberate. The implication was clear. The Sullivans' vigilance had drawn attention, but not necessarily in their favor. Their careful tracking, their quick adaptations, had marked them as exceptions. exceptions in a system designed to operate invisibly, to manage money in ways the average person would never perceive. Over the next days, subtle disruptions became more apparent. Checks took longer to clear, deposits reflected inconsistently, and the letters from the bank grew increasingly formal, legalistic, almost cold. Each new notification carried a precision that was both bureaucratic and intimidating. It was a system operating not against them directly, but in a way that forced them to respond, or risk consequence. Patrick pored over his notes late at night, cross-referencing statements, noting timing of deposits and withdrawals, and tracing patterns he was only beginning to understand. Freeman. Eleanor, meanwhile, meticulously logged every interaction with the bank, including Caldwell's visit, the letters, and every unusual transaction. Mary watched silently, sensing the tension as a tangible presence, her small fingers clutching coins she hid in drawers, beneath mattresses, behind books, anywhere she could imagine. Then came the first overt test. A check for a modest sum, intended for household repairs, was delayed without explanation. The local store refused to honor it until confirmation from the bank was received. Thomas and Eleanor drove downtown, navigating slick streets, uncertainty coiling in their stomachs. At the bank, they found themselves in a line of people, ordinary customers unaware of the invisible forces moving around them, all subject to the same opaque system. The teller examined the check, frowned slightly, and asked Thomas to wait. Minutes stretched, hours seemed to condense into a tense continuum. Finally, the teller returned with news. An internal review required additional verification, a new policy that applied retroactively, affecting any accounts with patterns considered exceptional. Exceptional. The word hit Thomas like a shockwave. Exceptional. His vigilance, his careful planning, had triggered scrutiny in the very system he trusted. Driving home, Thomas was silent, Eleanor's hand pressed to his knee, both of them absorbing the significance. Patrick asked questions, precise, probing. "Why does following the rules make them look at us?" he said. Thomas had no immediate answer. He only knew that the currents beneath ordinary financial life were alive, unpredictable, and indifferent to fairness. That night, the family gathered in the study, the dim lamplight casting long shadows across ledgers and notebooks. Thomas spoke quietly, measured, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "We are learning, the system watches, and it adjusts. Our actions, our caution, even our normalcy, all are part of the data it considers. We can survive, but only if we understand it, anticipate it, and act with precision." Eleanor nodded, eyes narrowing with determination. Patrick and Mary listened intently, absorbing lessons in risk observation and strategy that were beyond their years. In that moment, the Sullivan home transformed from a place of quiet domesticity into a command center, a hub of analysis, vigilance, and careful adaptation. The following weeks brought more subtle tests. Automated systems flagged certain transactions, interest calculations shifted mid-cycle, and notices arrived demanding confirmation for previously routine actions. The Sullivans adapted, diversifying accounts, tracking every movement, consulting journals, calling colleagues, and observing patterns in the neighborhood. Even minor anomalies, like Mrs. O'Malley struggling with new fees, became lessons in the hidden architecture of the system. Then, on a particularly frigid December evening, Thomas noticed a pattern he hadn't anticipated. Transfers meant to be routine had been delayed, fees subtly misapplied, and a small discrepancy in interest calculations suggested deliberate sequencing. The realization hit hard. The system was not passive, it was responsive. Every action they took prompted a counteraction, subtle but deliberate, designed to test, measure, or redirect. Patrick's observations were sharper now. He pointed to specific sequences, anomalies that coincided with bank notices. "They're learning what we do," he said quietly. Thomas felt a chill. The child's insight confirmed a fear that had been forming. The system wasn't just adjusting, it was monitoring, analyzing, and predicting. Mary, too, demonstrated instinctive intuition. Small coins she had hidden in drawers and behind books seemed like trivial precautions. Yet in her own way, she was understanding patterns, noticing irregularities in the household's flow of money, sensing the invisible movements that guided their lives. But then came the moment that would mark the first real confrontation. A letter arrived, marked urgent, detailing a pending audit of their accounts, requiring presence at the regional office. The timing was precise, the instructions meticulous. meticulous. The implications clear. The Sullivans' ordinary life was now fully intertwined with an opaque system whose rules were invisible, whose reach was wide, and whose patience was measured. Thomas read the letter aloud, his voice steady but cold. We have 36 hours to provide complete verification of all transactions over the past 12 months, including deposits, transfers, and savings activity. Failure to comply may result in restrictions or account suspension. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she took the paper. Patrick and Mary looked on, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The family realized that this was no longer theoretical. The invisible forces they had sensed, studied and tracked had manifested. The currents had surfaced. Outside, the wind howled, icy and relentless. Snow began to fall, blanketing the city in white, masking the streets, softening sounds, concealing the movement of ordinary life, even as extraordinary forces aligned against one family. The Sullivans had hours to prepare, to respond, to anticipate moves in a game whose rules were known only to a system that never paused, never forgot, never forgave. Thomas looked out the window, seeing the faint shadow of a figure moving in the distance, perhaps another representative, perhaps someone observing, measuring, waiting. He turned to his family, voice low but resolute. This is it. They've tested us. Now we respond, or risk losing everything. And in that quiet, tense moment, the family understood the stakes. This was not about mistakes or luck, or even bad timing. This was about systems, about invisible architecture that could redirect lives, and about their capacity to understand, adapt and survive. The snow fell heavier, and the wind seemed to echo the uncertainty. Every second counted, every decision mattered, and every eye in the Sullivan home was focused on the approaching test, one that could reshape their future in ways they could barely imagine. Hours before the regional office audit, the Sullivans receive a mysterious envelope slipped under their door, unsigned, containing a single phrase. Some rules are not written. Follow carefully. The family stares at it, hearts pounding, realizing that the true test is only beginning. The envelope lay on the polished floor, the single sentence printed in sharp, cold letters. Some rules are not written. Follow carefully. Thomas picked it up, turning it over, expecting a signature, a stamp, any mark of authority. There was none. Eleanor leaned in, eyes narrowed, trying to decipher tone, intent, any clue that could reveal origin or motive. Patrick hovered with notebook in hand, instinctively cataloguing the anomaly, while Mary clutched a coin in her fist, her small fingers tense with instinctive apprehension. The message was simple, yet its implications were anything but. Rules that were not written suggested a hidden framework, an invisible system operating in shadows, beyond regulation, beyond explanation. It was a warning and perhaps a challenge. The Sullivans understood immediately. They were being tested, their awareness scrutinized, their decisions weighted against a machine they could neither see nor fully understand. Hours later, Thomas called his former colleague in New York, the voice on the line tight, careful. "We received this," he said, reading the words aloud. There was silence. Then a measured reply. "It's part of a larger sequence. They test, they measure, they adjust. You've seen anomalies, now you're being observed more closely. Keep precise records, track every transaction. Trust nothing at face value." Eleanor paced the study, ledger in hand, cross-referencing dates and amounts, comparing them to letters, phone calls, and prior anomalies. Every small transaction became a puzzle piece, every delayed deposit a hint of unseen patterns. Patrick scribbled diagrams on sheets of paper, tracing flows of funds, noticing irregularities in timing and sequence. Even Mary, sensing tension, began cataloguing coins, noting when and where they were moved, instinctively preparing for contingencies. The family quickly realized that ordinary vigilance, keeping records, tracking statements, verifying deposits, was no longer sufficient. The invisible forces they were confronting were adaptive, calculating, responding to their actions. Their survival now depended not only on observation but on anticipation, on interpreting signals, on navigating a system designed to obscure its rules while enforcing its consequences. Late that evening, a knock at the door shattered the tense quiet. Thomas opened it to find no one, only a small package, carefully wrapped, left on the doorstep. Inside was a simple device, a small ledger, encoded in a way that suggested patterns rather than explicit instructions. Attached was a note, follow the sequence, avoid deviation. The message was clear, compliance alone would not suffice. They needed insight, reasoning, intuition. Eleanor's hands shook as she turned the pages. Patrick traced connections, noticing hidden cues embedded in the ledger. Thomas realized that what had seemed like simple policy adjustments and routine oversight was in fact a structured, deliberate system designed to test comprehension, patience, and strategic thinking. The next morning, the Sullivans faced the first overt challenge. Their local branch delayed several key transactions, citing unusual verification requirements. The family mobilized immediately. Eleanor and Thomas cross-checked ledgers, Patrick analyzed the timing of each notice, and Mary, silently observing, noticed discrepancies in amounts and patterns of communication. They began to act with coordinated precision, matching steps, predicting responses, documenting everything. By afternoon, it became clear. The system was adaptive. The bank, or whoever controlled these sequences, was testing reactions, mapping responses, measuring patience and accuracy. Every action taken by the family prompted counteractions, subtle, almost invisible, but consistent. One wrong move could trigger account freezes, misapplied interest, or further scrutiny. Hours blurred into tense focus. The Sullivans moved with precision, recalibrating after each anomaly, adjusting transactions, reorganizing records, communicating silently, strategically. Patrick's diagrams became more detailed, connecting letters, phone calls, and unusual bank movements into an evolving map of the hidden architecture. Eleanor's ledger entries grew meticulous, noting timestamps, amounts, and patterns of delay. Thomas coordinated, anticipating the system's responses, translating complex observations into actionable decisions. As night fell, the snow outside thickened, muffling the city, isolating the house. The family had survived the first major test, but the warning lingered in every line of correspondence, every anomaly, every hesitation in phone conversations. The message was undeniable. The currents beneath ordinary financial life were alive, intelligent, and exacting. Then, a sudden alert arrived on the telephone. A local account had been flagged, an unusual withdrawal pending review, instructions unclear. The Sullivans stared at it, realization dawning. They had been drawn further into the sequence, deeper than they had anticipated. Every step they had taken, every precaution, was now subject to evaluation by a force that observed silently, responded deliberately, and demanded precision. Thomas looked at his family, voice low but urgent. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about understanding the rules, even the ones they don't tell us exist. Eleanor nodded, face taut with resolve. Patrick, scribbling furiously, added new connections to his diagrams, connecting transactions to timings, anomalies to potential triggers. Mary, instinctive and quiet, organized coins and small funds, practicing patterns she did not yet understand consciously. Outside, the wind howled, snow swirling, masking movement, cloaking intentions. Inside, the Sullivan family worked with a focus bordering on obsession. Each anomaly, each irregularity, each cryptic message became a lesson, a clue, a signal. They understood that survival depended not just on knowledge, but on intuition, observation, coordination, and the ability to respond to patterns before consequences arrived. The night deepened. Streetcars clattered over icy rails, neon flickered through frosted windows, and somewhere outside the insulated home, the forces that watched, measured, and adjusted continued their unseen calculation. The Sullivans were no longer merely account holders. They were participants in a living system, one that tested patience, logic, and perception with a precision designed to challenge ordinary comprehension. As Thomas closed the ledger, a quiet thought struck him. The system was not merely reactive. It was anticipatory. It did not wait for mistakes. It measured tendencies, predicted reactions, and responded with subtle, deliberate corrections. And tonight, the Sullivans had only survived by the narrowest margin, by observing, interpreting, and acting faster than the system expected. And then, as if confirming the night's lessons, a final note slipped under the door, smaller than before, almost dismissive in appearance. It read, "Tomorrow the sequence deepens. Prepare wisely. Some paths cannot be retraced." The family exchanged glances. Fear was tempered with determination. They understood now. This was only the beginning. The system would escalate. The true test of comprehension, intuition, and survival was yet to come. As snow piled against the windows and the wind rattled the shutters, Thomas realized that the next day's sequence could irrevocably determine whether the Sullivans would survive the invisible currents or be swept away entirely. Dawn arrived grey and muted, the snow outside thickening into an unbroken white that blurred the streets, softened the city's edges, and muffled sound. Inside the Sullivan home, the air was taut, heavy with anticipation. Thomas sat at the study desk, ledger open, notes scattered like a constellation of anomalies across the table. Eleanor hovered nearby, watching him with a blend of worry and resolve. Patrick and Mary had assumed silent positions, Patrick poring over diagrams, Mary clutching her small coins, both aware that today would define everything. The mysterious note from the previous night loomed over them. Tomorrow the sequence deepens. Prepare wisely, some paths cannot be retraced. The words suggested more than an instruction. They implied inevitability. The family had survived previous tests through vigilance, observation, and careful response, but now the system demanded proactive maneuvering. This was no longer a defensive game. It was a challenge, one that required insight, intuition, and the courage to anticipate forces they could not fully see. Thomas traced the flow of recent transactions, cross-referencing letters, phone calls, and anomalies. Patterns emerged, small, subtle, almost invisible, showing how the system prioritized certain accounts and tested reactions. He began hypothesizing sequences, which transfers might trigger scrutiny, which deposits could provoke delays, which routine actions might appear irregular to the unseen eyes monitoring them. Every prediction carried weight. One wrong step, one misread pattern, could provoke consequences that reverberated beyond immediate accounts, potentially freezing access to essential funds or triggering stricter oversight. Eleanor coordinated alongside him, methodically compiling ledgers and reviewing past communications. Her experience with household management and meticulous attention to detail became a critical asset. She noticed small cues Thomas overlooked: the phrasing of letters, the timing of notifications, subtle inconsistencies in statement. Each observation sharpened their understanding of the unseen architecture controlling the sequence. Patrick, the youngest strategist, connected disparate elements into visual diagrams, linking anomalies with timing, geographic factors, and historical patterns of bank adjustments. He began to anticipate the system's reactions, identifying pressure points that could be manipulated, or that could backfire. Mary, quietly watching, contributed instinctively, relocating hidden funds in a subtle rotation that mirrored the family's broader strategy, safeguarding against contingencies no one had explicitly taught her to anticipate. By mid-morning, the family had devised a preliminary plan, a sequence of deposits, withdrawals, and transfers designed not just to comply, but to test and redirect the system's response. They acted as a unified entity, every movement deliberate, every decision coordinated. The rhythm was tense, almost mechanical, yet informed by intuition, honed through days of observation. Then, an unexpected variable arose. A call from the local branch, automated, impersonal, announced that one of their accounts had been flagged for exceptional behavior. The terminology was familiar, but now carried tangible urgency. Thomas froze momentarily, heart tightening. The sequence they had predicted was diverging. The system was adaptive, and now it was pushing back, altering the parameters faster than the family could adjust. Eleanor quickly recalibrated the plan, redirecting transfers and modifying deposit patterns. Patrick updated diagrams in real time, cross-referencing prior anomalies and predicting possible outcomes. Mary, sensing the tension, shifted her hidden reserves, ensuring that even if a portion of funds were temporarily restricted, the family retained flexibility. As afternoon faded into evening, the Sullivans executed the first critical maneuver. Each action was deliberate, measured, precise. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every ledger entry had been considered, anticipated, and sequenced. Outside, the snowstorm intensified, casting the house into an almost otherworldly silence, insulating the family from the city's oblivious hum. For hours they waited. The system responded, not violently but deliberately. Delays appeared where expected, minor discrepancies arose in transactions, but no catastrophic freezes occurred. Thomas exhaled slowly, sensing the delicate balance maintained. Eleanor allowed herself a brief nod of relief, while Patrick's eyes remained sharp, tracing emerging patterns, already planning the next moves. Mary, quiet and observant, seemed to sense the invisible currents shifting, adjusting instinctively in a way that belied her years. The momentary victory brought little comfort. The Sullivans understood that survival was not permanent. The system would continue to test, adapt, and challenge. Each maneuver taught them something new. The importance of anticipation, the subtle art of reading intention through pattern, and the realization that trust alone offered no protection. As night fell, the wind outside rattled shutters, and the snow swirled in silent, relentless movement. The family gathered in the study, reviewing results, analyzing responses, and refining predictions. It was clear that the next test would escalate. The system had learned from their first maneuver, adjusting its parameters, probing for weakness, calculating with precision. Then a faint sound at the door caught their attention. No knock this time, just a sliding movement, subtle and almost imperceptible. Eleanor stiffened. Thomas approached cautiously and found another envelope unmarked. Inside, a single sentence. Some sequences reveal more than compliance. Watch your next steps. The message was both confirmation and warning. The system had responded, acknowledged their actions, and now signaled a deeper level of scrutiny. The family realized the challenge was evolving, becoming more sophisticated, testing comprehension as much as action. Patrick traced new connections on his diagrams. Eleanor annotated ledgers with increasing precision, and Thomas mapped sequences in his mind, projecting potential outcomes. Mary silently rotated her hidden coins, instinctively creating redundancy, preparing for contingencies that no one had yet articulated. The Sullivan family sat together, the dim lamplight casting long shadows, the quiet hum of the snowstorm outside echoing the tension inside. They understood now that their world had changed. Ordinary life, simple routines, trust in familiar institutions, all of it was now mediated by an invisible system that observed, adapted, and tested relentlessly. And as Thomas looked at his family, he realized that the true test was not simply about money. It was about comprehension, strategy, intuition, and resilience. The next sequence would demand every skill they had begun to cultivate, and perhaps more than any of them knew they possessed. Just as the family prepared for the next maneuver, a soft, almost deliberate chime echoed from the front hallway, an unexpected signal that someone or something was observing them directly inside their home. The Sullivans froze, realizing that the invisible system they had been tracking might now be stepping out of the shadows. The chime echoed again, soft but deliberate, cutting through the tense quiet like a pulse. Thomas froze mid-step, Eleanor's hand gripping his arm, fingers pressing hard enough to leave an impression. Patrick and Mary exchanged quick, wide-eyed glances. The house, insulated by snow and the muffled city beyond, suddenly felt smaller, constricted, as though every wall and shadow could conceal someone watching. Thomas moved cautiously toward the hallway, each footstep measured, alert to the possibility of misdirection. The envelope lay on the floor, still open, its cryptic message burning in their minds. As some sequences reveal more than compliance, watch your next steps. The words now seemed almost alive, a warning not just of the system outside, but of an observer inside, monitoring reactions in real time. As he approached the source of the chime, Thomas noticed subtle signs, a slight scuff on the rug, a shadow that moved too fluidly, a draft that hinted at a door or vent ajar. Eleanor followed closely, senses heightened, while Patrick, notebook in hand, silently catalogued observations like a young strategist tracking enemy movements. Mary stayed back, clutching her coins, the weight of anticipation pressing down in a way she did not yet fully understand. Then, from the corner of his eye, Thomas saw it, a fleeting movement behind the frosted glass of the front hall window. Not human, not fully. It was deliberate, calculating, as if the system had manifested through a single observer, positioned to measure hesitation, attention, and decision-making. His pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that this was not mere coincidence. Eleanor whispered, Thomas, do you see that? He nodded, voice low. Yes, and it's learning. Patrick quickly connected the observation to patterns he had mapped, timing of anomalies, sequence of notifications, and subtle delays in banking communications. The presence outside, or perhaps inside, the house corresponded exactly with the points of greatest uncertainty in their maneuvers. The system was adaptive not only on paper, it was adaptive in practice, testing real-world reactions. The family retreated quietly to the study, closing doors softly, drawing curtains tightly, and positioning themselves strategically. Thomas laid out a plan: observe, document, and respond, but do not engage directly. The objective was to gather data on the observer, their pattern of movements, and any predictable behavior, while maintaining the integrity of the maneuvers they had carefully executed over the previous days. Hours passed with tense silence. Every creak, every shifting shadow, every faint sound of movement outside or inside the house was scrutinized. Patrick mapped each subtle disturbance in real time. Eleanor logged everything meticulously, and Mary, sensing urgency, rotated small funds again, creating hidden redundancies in case direct intervention or restriction occurred. Then, in the late evening, a low metallic click sounded near the study door, deliberate, precise, impossible to ignore. Thomas approached, sensing both threat and opportunity. He opened the door slightly and caught sight of a figure slipping away through a barely noticeable gap in the hallway. Too quick to be a casual intruder, too precise to be accidental. The family understood immediately. The system had placed someone, or some mechanism, inside their environment, watching, measuring, testing. Thomas clenched his jaw. "It's not just paper anymore," he said. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "It's here, inside the walls." Patrick scribbled frantically, connecting this encounter to every previous anomaly, every delayed transaction, every cryptic note. Mary watched silently, instinctively noting the location of the movement, the time, the patterns, her young mind absorbing lessons no one had spoken aloud. Over the next several days, subtle incursions continued. Packages left at the door, chimes without visible source, shadows in the corners of rooms. Each one tested the family's attention, coordination, and adaptability. The Sullivans realized that the system they faced had evolved beyond transactions and ledgers. It now interacted with physical space, measuring human response directly. The stakes escalated. Not only did they have to maintain financial survival, but they had to anticipate intrusion, observation, and subtle manipulations in their immediate environment. Every movement, every reaction became data points in the invisible system's calculations. Misstep could mean exposure, delay, or worse, the system forcing restrictions that could compromise the family's finances entirely. Late one night, Thomas gathered the family. He spoke in measured tones, aware of the gravity. "We've seen how the system operates. It's adaptive." "Oh?" It tests not just accounts, but behavior. Observation is part of the sequence. Our task is to anticipate it, respond without panic, and maintain control. Eleanor nodded, her meticulous nature now critical to their strategy. Patrick, notebook open, added final diagrams and possible countermeasures. Mary, instinctively understanding the stakes, quietly organized her hidden funds, rotating them in anticipation of further surveillance. And then the moment arrived that confirmed their deepest fears. An unmarked package appeared inside the house, carefully placed near the study window, containing a small device, a recorder of sorts, silently capturing sound and movement. The system had breached their sanctuary, making observation intimate, immediate, unavoidable. Thomas exhaled, tension coiling in his chest. "They're inside our walls, tracking, learning, measuring." Eleanor pressed a hand to her forehead, murmuring, "Every move counts now. Every step, every decision, precise." Patrick leaned closer to the diagrams, connecting the recorder's location to the anomalies he had mapped. Mary held her coins tighter, silent, instinctively aware that safety now required anticipation beyond anything they had practiced. And as the family huddled in quiet coordination, a new understanding crystallized. Survival was no longer about reacting to letters, phone calls, or ledger anomalies alone. The system had become personal, adaptive, and immediate. It was a game of precision, strategy, and intuition, one in which ordinary errors could cascade into serious consequences. As the recorder blinked softly, a subtle chime echoed from a hidden corner, signaling a new sequence, a deeper test. to aid a test. The Sullivans realized with sudden clarity that the system was now orchestrating their every move, and the next encounter could determine whether they remained in control or lost everything to unseen forces inside their own home. The soft, blinking light of the recorder cast faint shadows across the study floor, a subtle but relentless reminder of the invisible presence that had invaded their sanctuary. Thomas knelt, eyes narrowing, inspecting the device without touching it. Eleanor hovered, silent but vigilant, while Patrick traced lines on his diagrams, connecting the recorder's location to patterns of anomalies and previous disturbances. Mary remained close, clutching coins instinctively, sensing the tension with an instinct beyond her years. Thomas spoke in a measured tone, quiet but firm. "It's not just observation. It's analysis. Every sound, every movement, every hesitation. It's feeding the sequence." Eleanor nodded, understanding immediately. They were no longer reacting to letters, calls, or delayed transactions alone. The system had become immediate, adaptive, intimate. Patrick, younger than most strategists, identified subtle cues he had overlooked. The placement of the recorder corresponded precisely with their earlier maneuvers, positioned to monitor critical reactions. How Thomas adjusted ledgers, how Eleanor checked communications, how Patrick himself traced patterns, and even how Mary rotated her small reserves. Every movement inside the house had become part of the system's calculation. The family realized the stakes had escalated beyond financial survival. They were now participants in a system that tested comprehension, intuition, and the capacity to maintain control under observation. Any misstep could cascade into consequences, restrictions on accounts, delayed access to funds, or deeper scrutiny that would compromise their ability to respond effectively. Thomas formulated a plan: counter-observation. If the system was testing them, they needed to respond strategically, anticipate its calculations, and feed controlled information. Eleanor began documenting every detail, every interaction with the device, every subtle anomaly, creating a record that was precise, comprehensive, and verifiable. Patrick added layers of abstraction to his diagrams, simulating potential responses, predicting likely adaptations from the system. Mary, still quietly rotating her hidden coins, mirrored the family's tactical adjustments instinctively. Hours passed with tense coordination. The recorder blinked softly, silently capturing their actions. Every note, every observation, every shift in movement became deliberate, a conscious test of their capacity to remain composed while maintaining agency. The Sullivans were learning to transform observation into strategy, passive scrutiny into proactive maneuvering. Then came the first overt reaction from the system. The recorder's position changed subtly, shifted to monitor another angle of the study, and a soft mechanical chime resonated faintly, alerting them to its presence in a way that could not be ignored. Thomas leaned in, whispering instructions. Eleanor adjusted their documentation. Patrick recalibrated diagrams, and Mary rotated her hidden funds yet again, this time following an intuitive pattern that seemed to anticipate the device's movement. It became clear the system was not passive. It adapted, it responded, and it was testing more than their financial acumen. It was measuring focus, composure, and decision-making under direct observation. Late that night, Thomas reviewed their responses, cross-referencing anomalies, movement patterns, and subtle changes in the device's location. Eleanor catalogued every detail, creating a meticulous record. Patrick simulated the system's potential next moves, while Mary quietly prepared contingencies, instinctively understanding that the family's survival depended on anticipating the next sequence before it occurred. The storm outside intensified, snow swirling against windows, muffling the city and isolating the house. Each line in his notebook connected previous tests to possible future outcomes, and each pathway carried risks, some subtle, some devastating. Mary, though silent, rotated her coins in a quiet ritual she had developed, instinctively creating redundancies, ensuring that no single point of failure could compromise the family's resources. Her actions, instinctive yet deliberate, mirrored the lessons she had absorbed from days of observation, testing, and adaptation. Thomas and Eleanor gathered around the study table, mapping potential sequences aloud. They weighed every decision, which transfers to authorize, which deposits to delay, how to restructure the flow of funds to avoid detection while satisfying all compliance requirements. The system was testing their judgment, resilience, and anticipation. And every choice mattered, every hesitation was measured. Hours passed in tense deliberation. Snow swirled outside, muffling sounds, isolating the house, intensifying the sense of focus within. The Sullivans operated like a coordinated unit, each member aware of their role. Thomas directed, Eleanor documented, Patrick analysed, and Mary safeguarded hidden reserves. The air was taut with concentration. Even the slightest misstep could disrupt the fragile balance they had achieved. Then, the first overt challenge arrived. A call from the local branch demanded immediate verification of all high-value transactions over the past 6 months, with instructions that any deviation could result in temporary freezes or forced adjustments. Thomas felt the weight of authority in the words. The tone was neutral, almost procedural, but the stakes were unmistakable. Eleanor immediately began cross-checking ledgers. Patrick traced patterns, simulating multiple outcomes based on possible responses. Mary rotated hidden reserves quietly, preparing for contingencies. Thomas, calm but resolute, structured a sequence of responses designed to satisfy compliance requirements while minimizing exposure to further scrutiny. As evening fell, the Sullivans executed their first full-scale maneuver. Deposits were strategically timed, transfers recalibrated, and accounts cross-verified. Every step was deliberate, every move a calculation. Outside, the storm continued, isolating them from the city, insulating their efforts in a cocoon of quiet tension. The system responded. Delays appeared where anticipated, minor discrepancies arose, but no catastrophic freezes occurred. The family maintained control. Yet the warning from the envelope lingered. The test of decision had begun, and the system would escalate, probing not only their finances but their ability to act decisively under pressure. Hours stretched into night. The blinking recorder remained in place, silent but present, a constant reminder that observation continued. Every action the Sullivans took was measured, every reaction noted, every subtle adjustment calculated. They understood that survival depended not just on compliance but on strategic engagement, anticipating the system, predicting its responses, and maintaining composure under invisible scrutiny. Thomas looked at Eleanor, voice low, measured. We've survived the first maneuver, but the test is ongoing, Gazier. Every decision now carries amplified consequences. We must anticipate the next sequence, respond with precision, and avoid hesitation. Eleanor nodded, tense but resolute, while Patrick expanded diagrams, connecting the first full-scale challenge to potential escalations. Mary continued her instinctive rotations of hidden funds, a silent signal that even the youngest had grasped the stakes. Then, just before midnight, another subtle chime echoed from the hallway, a faint, deliberate sound. The Sullivans froze. The system was signaling, confirming observation, preparing the next stage. They executed the verification step by step, responding with care, recalculating on the fly, double-checking every figure, anticipating the system's likely reactions. Outside, the snowstorm persisted, isolating the house, insulating them from the city's ordinary rhythm, turning time into a compressed, tense continuum where each action resonated far beyond the moment. For a tense hour, the family navigated the system's live challenge. Delays occurred, minor inconsistencies appeared, but no catastrophic failures disrupted their progress. The Sullivans maintained control, though only just, sensing that the next phase would push them further, demanding both instinct and intellect in equal measure. Then, as the final verification was submitted, the recorder blinked one last time before going dark. Silence filled the study, thick and heavy. The family exhaled collectively, a shared recognition of both relief and heightened anticipation. They had survived the first live escalation, but the envelope's warning lingered. The system's tests were iterative, adaptive, and relentless. Patrick studied diagrams again, connecting anomalies from the live verification to prior disruptions. Eleanor reviewed ledgers, noting subtle cues in automated responses. Thomas considered the patterns, the timing, the responses, realizing that the system had now begun to anticipate not just their actions, but their methods of planning, their strategies, their instincts. Mary quietly adjusted her hidden reserves, instinctively preparing for the next challenge, already aware that security required anticipation beyond conscious thought. Night deepened. Snow piled against windows, muffling sounds, cloaking movement, isolating the family further. The recorder was still dark, but its presence lingered like a shadow. They understood the first live escalation was only the beginning. The system's tests were designed to evolve, to escalate, to probe deeper into comprehension, strategy, and resilience. Thomas spoke, voice low but resolute. "We've passed the first live test, but the sequence will not stop here. Every choice we make from now on will be measured. Every reaction will be evaluated. We must remain vigilant, deliberate, and precise." Eleanor nodded, her meticulous mind already analyzing possible next sequences. Patrick refined diagrams, projecting potential responses and countermeasures. Mary rotated coins silently, a small instinctive act of control amidst escalating uncertainty. And as they prepared for the next challenge, a final subtle signal arrived. A chime from an unexpected corner of the house, different from the recorder, sharper, deliberate. The system was initiating its next test, and this time the family understood, instinctively, that it would force choices that carried profound consequences, not just for accounts, but for their ability to act together, decisively, under pressure. The Sullivans realized, as the chime echoed through the study, that the next sequence would demand a decision that could either consolidate their control or expose them entirely to the system's relentless calculations. Every instinct, every observation, every carefully planned maneuver would be tested, and there would be no margin for error. The snowstorm outside had quieted only slightly, but inside the Sullivan home, tension had reached a palpable pitch. The chime from the unexpected corner of the house reverberated faintly, a signal of escalation, a summons to act under pressure. Thomas stood over the study table, hands resting on ledgers spread like a battlefield map, eyes scanning every figure, every notation, every anomaly. "Oh no." Eleanor circled him, notebook open, her pen poised to capture every decision, every adjustment, every nuance. Patrick crouched over diagrams, fingers tracing lines and arrows as he projected sequences forward, calculating probabilities under compressed timelines. Mary, small and silent, rotated her coins, a ritual that had become both instinct and strategy, her movements deliberate, a quiet countermeasure against unseen contingencies. The envelope from the previous night lay open, geometric symbol stark and unyielding. Its message had been clear: observation is complete. Now begins the test of decision. But the reality of that message was becoming increasingly complex. The system was no longer testing routine vigilance. It was probing judgment, strategy, and cohesion, the capacity of the family to act as a single coordinated entity under direct adaptive scrutiny. Then the call came, automated, precise, and urgent. It outlined a series of immediate decisions: approve or delay, transfer or withhold, consolidate or diversify. Each choice carried weighted consequences. Any misstep could cascade into delays, restrictions, or escalated oversight. Thomas inhaled slowly, exhaling in a deliberate rhythm. He knew hesitation would be observed, measured, and potentially exploited. Eleanor mirrored his composure, fingers steady as she prepared documentation to match their decisions precisely. Patrick's diagrams had expanded, intricate webs connecting past anomalies, current instructions, and predicted responses. "Look here," he'd said, pointing at a branching sequence. "Every delay triggers a countermeasure, but every consolidation has hidden consequences. If we misread the signal, it could cascade faster than we can adjust." Thomas nodded. "We anticipate, we document, we act deliberately, no guessing, no assumptions." Mary rotated her coins with instinctive precision, creating hidden redundancies to mitigate risk. Each movement was part of a silent, coordinated strategy she did not yet fully articulate, but understood implicitly. The family operated with a unity forged through repeated tests, observation, and direct engagement. They executed the first layer of decisions. Deposits were timed with precision, transfers strategically sequenced, and documentation submitted in parallel to satisfy every anticipated requirement. Each step was deliberate, every action conscious, calculated, and documented. Outside, the wind pressed against windows, snow piling in uneven drifts, but inside, the study was a concentrated hub of disciplined calculation. Minutes stretched into hours as the system responded. Delays occurred exactly where anticipated, minor discrepancies appeared, but no catastrophic failures arose. The family had maintained control, but only narrowly. Thomas realized that the system's escalation was not simply reactive, It was anticipatory, adaptive, and exacting. Then came the final layer. A live verification under real-time observation. The recorder in the hallway blinked faintly again, and a soft chime confirmed that observation was ongoing. The system was no longer testing static maneuvers. It demanded active, real-time coordination under high-pressure conditions. Eleanor read aloud instructions for verification. Step by step, as Thomas entered data, Patrick recalculated sequences, and Mary rotated coins to cover hidden contingencies. Every movement became data, every reaction part of an ongoing calculation. The hours stretched on, each moment heavy with consequence. Mistakes could ripple outward, magnified by the system's adaptive logic. Thomas kept his hands steady, Eleanor's pen moved fluidly, Patrick's diagrams shifted dynamically, and Mary's quiet rotations became a rhythm of resilience. Finally, the verification concluded. Silence enveloped the study. The family exhaled collectively, a mixture of exhaustion and cautious relief. They had passed the first full-scale decision challenge, but the envelope's warning remained. The systems test was iterative. Each layer completed only unveiled a deeper, more complex sequence. Thomas looked at the family, voice low and deliberate. We've proven coordination. We've survived escalation, but the system will continue, and the next sequence will push us further, forcing choices that test not just skill, but judgment, instinct, and cohesion. Eleanor nodded, already analyzing patterns and potential outcomes. Patrick's diagrams expanded again, tracing new pathways and contingencies. Mary, silent but precise, rotated coins, instinctively preparing for the next challenge. Outside, the wind rattled shutters, snow swirled in near silence, isolating the family further. The recorder remained dark, yet its presence was unmistakable, a silent, watchful confirmation that observation continued. The system had forced the Sullivans to act as a unit, integrating observation, anticipation, and decision-making under scrutiny, but the true test had only begun. Just as they began to gather their notes and recalibrate for the next sequence, another chime sounded, this time from multiple corners of the house simultaneously. The family froze, realizing with sudden clarity that the next phase would not only test decisions and coordination, but confront them with a level of pressure that could expose weaknesses they had not yet identified. Every instinct, every calculation, every movement would be scrutinized, and there would be no margin for error. The house seemed to breathe with tension, shadows lengthening and twisting as the wind outside pressed against the windows. The multiple chimes from every corner of the home reverberated faintly, signaling escalation, a simultaneous call to vigilance, analysis, and immediate action. Thomas felt the weight of the moment settle heavily on his shoulders. Eleanor's eyes, sharp and unflinching, scanned every ledger, every note, every diagram, already anticipating the next sequence. Patrick traced connections furiously, lines and arrows sprawling across pages like a living map, while Mary rotated coins quietly, her instincts now honed to the rhythm of unseen challenges. The envelope from earlier lay open on the table, the geometric symbols stark. Its message, observation is complete, now begins the test of decision, had evolved from a warning into an active directive. The system had shifted from observation and controlled testing into full-scale escalation, demanding immediate, precise coordination, strategic anticipation, and flawless execution. Thomas inhaled deeply. "This is it," he said, voice low but firm. "Everything we've prepared, our calculations, our documentation, our contingency planning, it all leads to this sequence. One mistake, one hesitation, and it could cascade beyond control." Eleanor nodded, the weight of responsibility mirrored in her taut features. Patrick's diagrams expanded, connecting prior anomalies, live observations, and potential consequences, mapping paths that could save them or trap them. Mary rotated coins methodically, each movement a subtle countermeasure to unseen pressures. Then the system delivered its peak challenge. Automated calls, emails, and notifications arrived simultaneously, each demanding immediate verification, documentation, and action. The instructions were precise, weighted, and interdependent. One response influenced another, a misstep in one path triggered anomalies in another. The sequence was no longer linear. It had become a living network, a web of interdependent consequences that required coordination, foresight, and instinctive precision. Thomas directed the first layer, confirming transactions, adjusting transfers, and cross-checking accounts in real time. Eleanor documented every step, her meticulous notes capturing nuances, deviations, and patterns, creating a record that could be analyzed for errors or insights. Patrick projected the branching sequences, calculating outcomes, predicting system responses, and adjusting their strategy dynamically. Mary rotated hidden funds, silently hedging against contingencies, her intuitive movements acting as a subtle layer of protection against any unforeseen restriction. Hours passed in intense focus. Every movement, every decision, every keystroke was scrutinized by the system, recorded and calculated. The family's ability to act as a unified, precise and adaptive unit was now under the ultimate test. Fatigue pressed against concentration, yet they maintained discipline, each member acutely aware that the slightest error could ripple across the network, triggering cascading consequences. Then a subtle shift occurred. The recorder in the hallway blinked faintly, accompanied by a soft, deliberate chime, signaling real-time feedback from the system. The family realized that observation was no longer passive. It was interactive. Every decision they made was measured against anticipation, and the system adjusted instantly to test judgment, coordination, and composure. Thomas exhaled slowly. It's measuring more than accuracy now. It's testing response, instinct, and unity, he said. Eleanor's pen hovered, recording every subtle cue, while Patrick recalculated branching sequences with lightning speed. Mary rotated coins with a precision that seemed almost instinctive, her silent movement synchronizing with the family's efforts. As the night deepened, the sequence reached its climax. Notifications, verifications, and document submissions arrived in rapid succession, each more complex than the last. The family executed decisions under the system's watchful gaze, responding instantaneously, recalibrating strategies, and anticipating reactions. Fatigue gnawed at their focus, yet discipline and cohesion held them together. Finally, the last verification was submitted. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by the wind outside. The recorder's blinking light went dark, and the multiple chimes ceased. The family, exhausted but resolute, understood that they had survived the peak escalation. The system had tested their comprehension, coordination, intuition, and resilience, and they had endured. Thomas looked around the room, voice low but measured. We've completed the test. Every sequence, every decision, we've maintained control. But we've learned something crucial. Observation is constant, systems are adaptive, and survival requires unity, precision, and awareness. Eleanor exhaled, relief tempered by reflection, while Patrick closed diagrams, capturing insights for the future. Mary, still quiet, rotated her coins one final time, instinctively marking the completion of the sequence. And yet, as dawn broke and snow softened against the windows, the family knew the lessons of the past days would resonate far beyond the immediate challenge. The system had revealed both their vulnerabilities and their strengths, their ability to adapt, anticipate, and act decisively under pressure. Though the peak escalation had concluded, the Sullivans sensed the subtle hum of observation lingering, a reminder that the world of hidden systems, unseen forces, and adaptive calculations would continue. Their survival had been earned, but understanding and mastery remained a journey unfinished. Dawn broke slowly over the Sullivan home, snow softening into muted white, blanketing the streets in silence. Inside, the family moved with cautious calm, each step measured, every breath deliberate. The recorder remained dark, the chimes silenced, the envelopes no longer arriving. The system, relentless and adaptive, had concluded its sequence, for now. Thomas, Eleanor, Patrick, and Mary sat together in the study, the quiet enveloping them like a fragile cocoon. The past days had been a crucible. The letters, the cryptic notes, the subtle intrusions, the blinking recorder, the live verifications, all had tested their comprehension, precision, coordination, and resilience. Each sequence, each decision, each measured response had taught them more than any ledger or diagram ever could. They had learned to anticipate, to observe, to act under pressure, and to trust both instinct and reason in equal measure. Thomas reviewed the ledgers one last time, confirming that every account, every transfer, every hidden reserve had survived the test. Eleanor meticulously documented the final sequence, her handwriting precise, capturing every nuance and detail for reflection. Patrick reviewed diagrams connecting past anomalies to outcomes, tracing patterns that would serve as both record and guide. Mary rotated coins quietly, her small movements echoing the deliberate care and instinctive precision that had become part of the family's survival strategy. For the first time in days, the house felt still. Yet the family knew the lessons of observation and adaptation were not confined to this sequence alone. They had faced an invisible, relentless system and had emerged intact, not by luck, but by strategy, intuition, and unity. Their success had required seeing beyond the immediate, anticipating consequences and acting decisively under scrutiny. Thomas spoke, voice low, reflective. We've endured the tests. We've navigated the sequence. But the lessons remain. The world is full of systems, hidden forces and challenges that measure more than just compliance. They measure awareness, foresight and cohesion. Eleanor nodded, pensively tracing the edge of her notebook. Patrick's diagrams lay flat on the table, a visual testament to strategy and adaptation, while Mary's quiet movements marked the end of one phase and the readiness for whatever came next. Outside, the storm had passed. Snow glistened against rooftops, streets remained empty and hushed, and sunlight began to filter through grey clouds, casting long, reflective shadows. It was a new day, but the Sullivan family understood that life beyond their home would demand the same vigilance, composure, and adaptability. Their world had changed. They had learned how to navigate the unseen, how to respond to pressure, and how to act as a unified force. They gathered briefly, hands brushing over the final ledgers and diagrams, a silent acknowledgement of shared effort, trust, and resilience. Each member of the family had contributed uniquely, Thomas with leadership and foresight, Eleanor with meticulous documentation and analysis, Patrick with strategic projection and calculation, Mary with instinctive precision and subtle protective measures. Together, they had navigated a labyrinth of observation, decision, and adaptation, emerging with knowledge, confidence, and unity. The recorder remained in the hallway, its presence quiet but indelible, a reminder of what had passed and a silent acknowledgement that observation was ongoing, even when invisible. The Sullivans did not need it anymore. They had internalized the lessons, built resilience, and learned to anticipate forces beyond the visible, beyond the immediate. And as sunlight filtered into the study, illuminating ledgers, diagrams, and coins, the family shared a moment of quiet reflection. Their journey had been exhausting, intense, and invisible to the world outside, but within the walls of their home, they had forged understanding, mastery, and cohesion. The system had tested them, but in its wake, it had left something enduring. Knowledge, confidence, and the certainty that they could face challenges, seen or unseen, with clarity and unity. The Sullivans rose together, moving through their home with deliberate calm, aware that the world beyond remained unpredictable, but confident in their ability to navigate. Each had grown, each had adapted, and each carried a newfound awareness of hidden systems, unseen pressures, and the power of coordinated action. The house was silent, the snow soft, and yet the lessons would resonate far beyond these walls, lessons of anticipation, insight, and resilience that no system, no matter how adaptive, could fully erase. The test had ended, the family had endured, and the quiet, reflective understanding they now shared would guide them forward into a world of challenges both visible and hidden, with precision, intuition, and unity. The sun climbed slowly, filtering pale light into the Sullivan home, touching ledgers, diagrams, and coins with a soft glow. Outside, the streets lay still beneath snow, hushed as if the world itself paused to witness a fragile victory. Within the walls, the family moved together, a quiet rhythm of endurance, understanding, and connection. The past days had tested more than financial acumen. They had demanded foresight, composure, intuition, and unity. Observation, anticipation, and measured action had become their survival tools, each family member contributing uniquely to a coordinated, precise, and adaptive whole. In facing a system that measured everything, from hesitation to instinct, they had discovered resilience, trust, and strategy, not just as abstract concepts, but as lived practice, yet the lessons extended beyond ledgers and hidden reserves. The experience had revealed the intricate interplay of unseen forces shaping life, the necessity of awareness, and the power of deliberate, connected action. Survival was never passive. Mastery required engagement, insight, and reflection. As sunlight grew warmer, illuminating the family gathered together, the quiet settled into a contemplative hum. They had endured the unseen, navigated the unknown, and emerged with clarity and unity. The world beyond would continue to challenge them, but now, armed with knowledge, strategy, and trust in each other, they faced it with deliberate calm and unshakable resilience. And in that soft, reflective light, the Sullivan family, tested, measured, and tempered, stood ready for whatever sequence came next, a living testament to vigilance, unity, and the power of insight in a world governed by unseen forces.